Okay, so the bodies of Ross Monaghan and Eddie Lyons Jr. are to be returned to their families in Scotland and are likely to be huge funerals and likely to be show of strengths within the Scottish underworld, where there has been this sort of bubbling feud between the Daniels and Lyons families, which we've talked about. And also, these are big players that have both been murdered together. You know, it's funny, we've done a little bit on this story, but I actually believe there's an awful lot more digging to do to work out exactly what's happened here. The Spanish authorities clearly have their own suspect in this, and are they still looking for extradition, or have they had...
Seeking extradition.
But that doesn't answer all the questions, really, even if they are seeking the extradition of somebody, because these are such big players here that it's hard to believe that this was a random shooting, something that wasn't ordered or directed from somewhere very high up the ladder.
Well, look, I think it probably is reminiscent of the Hutch-Kinahan feud, where while there was two central crime gangs, I suppose, involved in that, as that feud went on, there was these sub-feuds, I suppose, emerged where people, for example, people like Bottler Devoy up in Ballymun, who's currently serving a lengthy sentence for basically an attack on a Gardaí. But he was dragged into it because of people on the edges of the core feud, I suppose.
I'm laughing at you saying Bottler Devoy was dragged.
Well, he leapt or dragged, whatever way you want to look at it.
Probably leapt, and of course those characters do exist within the fringes of all these groupings.
Yes.
There's not a clear line in the sand.
No.
And people don't just line up on either or side. It's easy for the media to just describe it as a feud. Two sides, but yes.
But what you saw was people like Thomas Bomber Kavanagh using people like Bottler Devoy to maybe give them weapons, give them logistical support, and then unleash them on their rivals or people that they feared were linked to them. So that's, I think there is a part of what that is happening in Scotland. Now, as you read the Scottish papers and you look on social media, a lot of the clear demarcation between the Daniels crime gang, which was really one of the first established drugs gangs in Glasgow, a gang that really made their mark in the heroin business in the 80s and 90s, and then the Lyons gang, who were certainly associates of them at one stage, but went on to become probably the major players in the cocaine business. But as you see this violence, emerges on the streets of Scotland, there's another guy, also interestingly based in Dubai, a guy called Ross McGill, known as Miami, who's also playing in there. So these things get complex, I suppose. Eddie Lyons and Ross Monaghan. Certainly Eddie Lyons was obviously that family connection to the Lyons family as part of the core Lyons family, but I think generally regarded as maybe not the one of the key brothers in that criminal network. But Ross Monaghan was certainly one of the more senior players in the criminal underworld in Scotland, and had been for over a decade. Was believed to have been involved in the murder of Kevin Gerbil Carroll, who had been a key Daniel crime gang enforcer, probably the number one muscle in that gang. So look, that murder that happened in Fungarola, it was a carefully planned, well carried out murder.
The men were drinking in Monaghan's bar and watching the Champions League Cup final when a hooded assassin ran in and opened fire on both of them in front of tourists and quite a crowded bar, reminiscent of the murder of Gerard Hatchet Kavanagh in a bar on the Costa del Sol. What's the name of that? Harmon's bar.
It was.
On the Costa del Sol in 2014.
Yeah.
Just before really the feud broke out. It was caught on CCTV as well, and the footage of that has been used in a number of documentaries since, because of course at that point in time it was seen that Kavanagh had, and it was put out that Kavanagh owed money to the Russians, which was always what the Kinahan said. And it was that was kind of investigated, wasn't it? And there was all sorts of murky goings on in the background. He had returned to Ireland to try and collect money for the Kinahan organisation in the years before his death, and had kind of come to blows with some serious characters while he was collecting that money. But all the while he was actually killed by essentially his own.
Yeah.
Because he was shot dead on the orders of the Kinahan cartel and with the blessing of his own cousin, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, who he was in business with. It would have been unheard of to think then that that's what happened. And it did take a long time for that to come out of the wash for the reasons behind it, which were sort of bizarre, really, but kind of seemed to lean on the fact that Daniel Kinahan simply didn't like him and took an opportunity to create a story that was believed by his cousin Bomber Kavanagh, and that got him the sanction to shoot him dead. But it has all those hallmarks of that, doesn't it? I mean, the fact that it's caught on CCTV, it's such significant characters. I think there's kind of like sometimes when these murders happen in Spain, it does take a while for the ripple effects and for the whispers to come home and for the real story to come out. But it's hard to look on this and to think that it's for a completely different sort of reason other than those long-standing divides between the Lyons and the Daniels families.
Yeah, and of course the Spanish police have been really clear, which you wouldn't get over here, I suppose, or in Scotland, where they've effectively released a statement saying that this is part of the Lyons-Daniels feud and that's why it was carried out. You don't get that in this part of the world, but it directly contradicts what the Scottish police have been saying, which was that they've no intelligence that it was planned in Scotland and that they've no intelligence linking it to the ongoing violence on the streets of Scotland. That has really worsened over this.
That could be a bit of a playing with words, though, because again, when you think back, and it does take a while for the intel to come down, but you have a situation in Scotland, which you had similar in Ireland, that you had a group of drug dealers, numerous groups of drug dealers. Ours worked together for a while before they began to feud, but they initially migrate to Spain. And then there's an onward migration to Dubai. And really it's the Dubai sort of powerhouse where the decisions are made. The trouble on the streets of Spain and the shootings in the streets of Spain, the intelligence mightn't lead back directly or come directly from Ireland.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
and in the same way that what's happening on the streets of Scotland, of both Glasgow, it is just Glasgow actually, is it?
No, it's in Edinburgh.
It's in Edinburgh as well.
Yeah.
So what's happening there probably can't exactly be directly linked to it, but the culmination of the intelligence coming together will no doubt show that there's links and there's feuds and sub-feuds, and this is a situation which is, it's hard to imagine that their murders won't be avenged.
No, and of course, if you look back on the Hutch Kinahan feud, you had the shooting of Michael Barr, who was a Republican figure who was blamed by the Kinahans for a role in in getting the Regency weapons, which was very strongly denied by his family. But his murder was carried out by a number of men from Ireland, but there was also a guy called David Hunter who's serving life in an Irish prison for that murder. Mm-hmm. But he was flown over from Liverpool. He had no connection with the Hutch Kinahan feud. It is believed he was paid, brought in and flown in because there was no possible way of tracing him. Mm. So it could well be that something like this has occurred in Spain as well, where David Hunter had a criminal history, but he didn't have a massive history as a gangland killer, for example. While he never admitted his role, there was forensic evidence that ultimately would see him convicted. And so these things can happen as well. And that was an attempt to disguise that. And I suppose given the fact that Michael Barr was a Republican, maybe to have a deniability.
The Spanish police have said they believe this is to do with the feud between the Daniels and the Lyons. Scottish police have said they have no intelligence to suggest it is. So there's a lack of communication there. And that does happen. While certainly Europol, which the UK is still involved in, although it is no longer part of Europe. I mean, the NCA is a very good, partner of most European police forces and particularly Ireland. But at times, unless there's an actual Europol operation in place, the intelligence isn't shared as seamlessly as sometimes if there's two different investigations going on and there's no reason for the police to share the information, they won't sometimes.
No, they
sometimes there's personalities behind that, and sometimes it just isn't good enough relationships.
Yes, and sometimes there's no obligation to share intelligence after all. And we've seen this with the PSNI and the guards at times, where certainly in the murder of Robbie Lawler, was all that intelligence being shared seamlessly? Not necessarily. Now, police forces will be happy often to share evidence and to share, details of people's movements, details of people's convictions. All of that is really factual information. But all police forces collect this intelligence, and they don't always feel obliged to share that.
Not immediately, and nor do they unless someone comes knocking.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And looking for it. And there could be a little bit of a lack of communication going on there, which I would see as being, because they're saying two distinct things, aren't they? Which are totally different, and which is confusing the matter. But ultimately, two significant criminals have been shot dead by a hooded assassin who wasn't acting, out of the sake of it. This individual was being paid by somebody up the rungs to shoot these two guys dead.
Yeah, and
that's undoubted.
And somebody who knew what they were doing. I mean, there's been random shootings across Spain, guys getting caught and guys that are, drunk or firing off weapons. But this wasn't one of these. This is a carefully targeted assassination. Even when things went wrong, the gunman managed to follow it through. And there continues to be violence on the streets of Scotland, though there hasn't yet been any more fatal shootings. But I think they said
tensions are very high there.
Tensions are high, and I think over the last couple of days, it was the 50th arrest as part of this Operation Portalodge, which is an attempt to stamp down on this violence.
And to quell it before it gets any worse.
And then bizarrely, there was, over the weekend, there was this grouping are called Tamo Junto, who we've spoken about before. So they're linked to this guy, Ross McGill, who's over in Dubai, and they are involved in all this wave of violence. And they put out a statement over the weekend, giving out about other people putting up fake social media.
Reporting to be them.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's amazing. Like it's something that has been absolutely huge news in Scotland because of the level of incidents. They're really, really constant. A lot of them are non-fatal, but involve like arson attacks, assaults, attacks on homes. And all of that is really, really disruptive. And we've seen it in places like Drogheda, places like the inner city during the feud, where it can really take over an area,
Mm-hmm. Well, look, the bodies are to be repatriated to Scotland, and like what happened in our own city, the funerals will be a very big opportunity for intelligence gathering.
Yeah.
To see who lines up where and with who. The facts are that the Daniels and the Lyons gang have decades-long rivalries. Spanish police say the hitman they believe carried out these assassinations is a member of the Daniels grouping, and nobody's denying the fact that the two victims were linked to the Lyons grouping, who are linked to our own Kinahans.
Yeah.
Just to make everything even more confusing.
Complicated.
Yeah. Anyway, we're going to come back to this and to this story and get further in depth into what's actually going on here.
Thanks, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.